Good morning, everybody. It's Cowboy here. It is Friday, April the 4th, and it is 11 a.m. EST, and we have a treat for you today. Veles, who we would say, if he were here, needs no introduction, has got a very special show lined up for us. So, Veles, I'm going to pass it to you right now, and I'm going to have my my paper and pencil ready. Because I'm going to listen to this thing probably 3 times after we do it live, but I'm going to I'm going to go ahead and let you go now.
Thank you, my friend. And as always, folks, as we sit here in the salvage yard with the car that is Rogue News, getting the engine running, we were working through some technical difficulties this morning with the gorilla. Had to hand it to Algo and myself because he's got some other stuff going on. So very glad to have you all on this morning. Did post to Discord that we would have today's program, and we're both on Rumble and YouTube at the moment. So very glad to have you all with us, and just uncommon times we're living through. Today's program is going to cover a couple things. I've got there is no left or right ideologies. There's just them when it comes to flipping a switch of repression. The FBI always seems to be in the right place at the right time, but unable to do anything about it. Refunding the government and what's really going on with Doge. Some thoughts on Fort Knox. Vellis T-shirts, book recommendation. Ronan Farrow, a joke from the Soviet Union, as a warning to watch your surroundings. And then a rather in-depth piece on the JFK files. I was going to try and cover today 2 authors that have strong parallels between the 2 of them, and also provide us an opportunity to understand layers of things that are hidden, that are even in the public domain. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get that content ready to get a whole bunch of other stuff to cover. And then last but not least, I will be covering, for those of you that may have friends or so on that are in this universe right now, I will be covering on a future program a number of, strange as this may sound, I will be covering a number of job hunting websites that I recommend, as well as some other tools and resources, especially thanks to artificial intelligence that are now available. And as I often say about AI, don't trust it to do all the work for you, but it can get a lot of what you're trying to get done. But I know a lot of people have been impacted, not just at the federal level, but similar and equally. There's quite a lot of openings out there as well, which I found interesting. So a topic near and dear to both Algo and V's heart, the markets. I'm not gloating in the slightest because of the seriousness of what's occurring right now. And on my last few shows, I've shared what was taking place in the executive ranks of corporations as well as senior leaders, and have shared with you my thoughts on what it takes to pull the autonomy of the United States economically and politically out from under the globalists, at least to a degree. But certainly the last 2 weeks and the behavior in the markets is interesting, to put it mildly. And you will see a lot of disinformation and a lot of misdirection by a number of media folks out there, and as usual, focusing on the wrong things, whether it's CNN or Fox. I was in the gym yesterday, and one of the monitors they had up on the screen was heavily covering the CNN coverage, which thankfully was muted. But, it was just wall to wall, the sky is falling. But this is, I said on a couple of shows recently, especially on my last one, how painful and how ungodly this is going to get, and especially for people who had vested interests in things staying the way they were. I posted a link yesterday on Discord to Carl Denninger's recent take on the tariffs. It was pretty straightforward. It wasn't all that lengthy, but you've got a lot of people who, I'll say it out loud, they're, for lack of a better word, they're profiting from slavery. Children making tennis shoes for Nike is slavery. And of course, Nike has spent millions of dollars not correcting the problem, but attacking anybody who keeps trying to point it out. But any of the textile type manufacturing in Southeast Asia is of a fashion, a form of slavery. We've all heard the stories about Foxconn manufacturing cell phones and similar, where the working conditions were so bad, people were literally throwing themselves out the window. And then the company had the unmitigated gall to say that if you kill yourself, we're going to bill your family. These are the types of things happening around the world, in South America, in Asia, in other parts of the world where citizens don't have the ability to protect themselves, and where during NAFTA, a lot of these companies moved around the world and gutted out the manufacturing in the United States. Now, there's a lot to that, and I know V has very strong views about manufactured things of value rather than intellectual capital per se, but a lot of damage was caused by NAFTA, and certainly here in the Midwest we saw it in the auto industry specifically, but it was across the board. So simply put, and to oversimplify, how do you avoid a tariff? Well, you produce goods in the country who has the tariffs. If you produce goods in the United States, you're not going to get hit with a tariff. And, let's also remember that the Mercosur bloc, who I've mentioned on a couple of programs, which is the trade regime used by Brazil and a couple of other countries in South America, the Mercosur bloc's been in operation for years. If you don't manufacture or develop goods in those countries, they've been hitting you for decades with massive tariffs. It's why the auto industry located so many manufacturing plants for cars and things inside Brazil, was to try and get around those tariffs. But when the United States does this, everybody takes notice because of the impact that it has. So as we're living through a period of time where we're watching the markets tank by 1,100, 1,500 points a day, to paraphrase Ross Perot, that'll make your fingers tingle. And I know financial advisors right now that are trying to pull their clients off the ceiling. Whether pro or con of the administration doesn't really matter, because there's bigger things going on right now than that. But it's going to have a hell of an impact on everybody. And honestly, folks, we're going to need until the end of the summer, if not the fall, to really start to understand. And I don't mean through the mainstream media. I mean through sources who know what they're talking about. We're going to need until the fall to really understand how this all shook out. Because in many respects, this is an economic war of attrition. Can a lot of other countries, especially in Europe, hold out longer than we can? And the simple answer is they can't. Now, I'm not saying that in a bullying regard, but part of this also is the conflict over removing Europe out of the game, which is something I've raised before. This was the 2014 or so documentary, the German documentary I've mentioned to all of you, called Master of the Universe, about a major private equity leader from Germany that was part of a documentary about the influence of private equity. And he made this famous comment about when they reset. I mean, it was amazing that at the end of this documentary, this guy just flat out looks at the camera and goes, when they reset the global economy, and they're going to have to, because, Bretton Woods is dead. And for many of us, like here at Rogue, I mean, for us, that's our daily bread. I mean, we get that. We know that. We've been talking about that for years. A lot of other people out there have as well. But for somebody at his level to just say that out loud, but his takeaway was they want to remove Europe from the table. They want to bring it down to basically China, Japan, Britain, the United States, a sprinkling of the major private equity groups. But that's about it. And his whole take was they're going to take out Europe. And in order to take out Europe, you have to take out Germany. And before you take out Germany, you got to take out France. And he laid out all these things that would happen, most of which did occur. So we're at the, how does the saying go? We're at the end of the beginning. Now we've got the beginning of where this is going to lead. And, beyond a crystal ball, it's going to be hard to tell. But I did want to open today's program about what's going on now. For those of us who lived through 1988, or if you saw the scene in the movie Margin Call, where the famous English actor makes reference to what happened to his finances in 1988, it's always a function of degree. When the market was smaller, as far as the New York Stock Exchange, or the exchanges were smaller, you didn't need weeks of 1,500 point drops in 88 the way we're having right now. What happened in 88, went down in probably a month, and it was catastrophic. We were, depending on what industry you were in, we were still digging ourselves out of that one as far as late as 1993, 1994. So, anywho, keep your swivel on, don't do anything crazy, and we just got to see how this plays out. So, flip a switch repression, a theme I've raised previously, now with new firsthand experience that I've had over the last few weeks. Let's not be too giddy about those on the quote unquote left getting hammered in their favorite causes and concerns, and especially the more vocal elements. To that end, I've been on the ground recently with universities holding public comments with their students and staff. On the one hand, I was chuckling with colleagues about our having bingo cards for various words or terms who kept coming up as various folks went up to the microphone. Things including eschatological processes, transparency, food insecurity, housing insecurity, profound lack of scientific research, the hostility of the government in Washington, D.C., attacks on universities, attacks on green card holders expressing themselves, freedom of expression, repression, and a laundry list of angry comments. Some takeaways about those commentaries. If you can't afford to eat or find a residence for a great university, even if you've been granted access to that university, you're either going to need to be very creative about your lifestyle or find another school to attend. That's just life. You had no problem with attacks from Washington, D.C. on those you hate, and that's a central theme in a segment later. Lastly, if you're a green card holder attending in an American university, you're a guest of this country. If you disrupt our society, no matter the cause, your being a guest is going to end. Remember, British and Commonwealth citizens keep getting executed in Asia for trying to smuggle narcotics. They were guests too. We're only deporting you. We're not executing you. At the same time, and I truly mean this, thousands of students and researchers across the United States just had their money cut off, and they're in great pain. It's easy, I suppose, for those of us who've worked in many industries and with very different job roles to be thankful for our ability to do the job that needs doing. That's an old Midwest saying about you'll not necessarily get to do the job you want in the Midwest. You do the job that needs doing. That must be very frightening and a very foreign idea and reality for people who've spent their entire lives in academia or research. But that's also the same for nurses, doctors, and financial folks for whom that's all they've ever known. Equally, for many of these people I heard speaking before university officials, I did truly feel they'd been done a disservice, if not outright cruelty. In business, we'll often try and soften the blow by giving folks time to find other roles or develop exit strategies when organizations go through change. That includes occasions like the year 2001 when it was realized you're not going to need to find another job in telecom or data centers. Those jobs were literally disappearing, and you had to migrate to something else entirely. It was a painful realization the days of that work were over, or at least until 24 years later in 2025 when those jobs are now suddenly needed again. What has occurred to many in government, academia, and research is truly no less than cutting off someone's heroin without having the decency to give them some methadone or naltrexone to ease the withdrawal. Across this country, thousands of people are going through a physical and emotional withdrawal as bad as getting off narcotics. Let's have a little human decency in our amusement. This is occurring to a segment of people who previously attacked our beliefs. Reflecting on my Midwest upbringing and as well knowing quite a few several private business owners, there's also some solid advice from those folks as well. Many of the dads when I was growing up or at my little undergraduate university would often say the same thing. They would say, the worst thing I can do for you as my kid is make it easy for you, to guarantee you anything. Oh, sure, I'll give you guidance when you need it in life, and if you hit a rough patch, please by all means let me know. I'm always here to help. But these fathers would say, the worst thing I can do for you is just give you things because you don't have the current means or you've had some bad luck. Developing human character often comes from strife and challenges and pain, not from mom and dad writing you another check. Equally, we need a sober assessment regarding one's ideology. It's the same agencies who previously couldn't stop the inflow at our borders who in roughly 2 months clamped the U.S. border closed harder than the digestive system of an 80-year-old smoker. Granted, they were permitted to do their jobs versus the preceding 4 years, but it's the same group of agencies. It's the same FBI who suddenly knows where everyone is, who's connected to violent criminal organizations, whether narcotics, smuggling, or anything else, as those roundups continue. All that needed to occur was someone to flip a switch. It's these same organizations, and even none other than Fox News, who were ready to bring criminal action just a few years ago if you didn't get your shot. The same people freezing bank accounts are incarcerating people who also believed they were expressing their First Amendment rights, no different than thousands of angry students and academics are doing today. Are those not all our First Amendment rights, my friends, regardless of ideology? Oh, sure, the government isn't going to listen to January 6 protesters any more than universities facing hundreds of millions of dollars in frozen government money are going to listen to their students. At least allow us the right to speak our minds before you ignore us. My point, though, is simply this. In case we've not been paying attention, whether in 2018, 2020, or 2025, it's the same power, folks. Sometimes it moves against the left. Sometimes it moves against the right. One of the key methods to protect your rights is your knowledge of the law, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution. That and some VPN tools and a Faraday bag will help as well. One other item to consider. In the former Soviet Union, as well as other repressive regimes, it was an old story. Yes, they monitored phone lines to repress society more than out of concern for the CIA. Yes, the KGB, among others, loitered around long lines waiting for basic life necessities, wanting to hear the latest jokes in the country. This is how they knew whether the public was about to pop its cork or was managing the repression fairly well. The same was true in China during the rougher years in that country's history. At the same time, when you hear stories about contemporary China's near total observation of its public, do you truly believe you're not living in the same situation? That was how they knew when to let off the pressure during the coup, folks, and I'm deadly serious. I'm not in a position to provide you what I've heard about this, and I'm certainly not going to say it on the air. But there were things that the folks who monitor the public was concerning them. And it was a little bit more than some folks letting off weekend steam in the woods of Michigan with paintball. I wonder what else they're hearing people are discussing presently who has the powerful concerned. So remember, even liking an image on X, formerly Twitter, or other social media is all they need to know what you're thinking. Patterns. Matthew Arrett recently reproduced a report from 2022 regarding his study of domestic U.S. terrorism. There was a data point in there, among many others, worth noting. Of 138 official terrorism incidents in the United States from 2001 to 2012, there were FBI informants involved in every single one of those incidents. Let me say that again. The FBI had informants in every single one of those 138 terrorism incidents between 2001 and 2012. Further, this is not from an alternative researcher, but none other than Fordham University's law program Center on National Security who conducted the study. As we know, this pattern goes all the way back to the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, where the FBI's informant filmed everything they were doing prior to the bombing. But wait, there's more. Who loudly and publicly stated their involvement in drafting and passing the Patriot Act following 9/11? It was none other than Joe Biden. But wait, there's even more. Joe publicly stated at that time he used as reference for his edits of the draft of the Patriot Act his own omnibus domestic surveillance legislation, which he drafted in 1994 following the 1993 World Trade Center attack. Funny, an FBI informant is filming people who are building a truck bomb to hit the World Trade Center, and yet no one thought of arresting them before they parked it. Remember what I shared with all of you about the location of where that truck bomb was parked in 1993. It was not in a structurally weak area of the building, but instead another high-profile area. Speaking of patterns, we have a plethora of distractions right now. Justin Bieber is making the Hollywood news about his wife unfollowing him on social media and his general disheveled appearance, who no doubt ignores the whole Diddy angle he may be concerned about becomes public. We have a ton of stories about aggressive aliens thanks to classified, now use that word loosely, classified CIA files. We have earthquakes everywhere and rumors of volcanic eruptions in Alaska and off the coast of Oregon, not to mention the actual ones in Asia. Former aides and media stars are all chatting weekly about how impaired Joe Biden was. Oh, the controversy, you dirty liars. How about a bigger question in that distraction? Who the heck was running the country and had control of the nuclear briefcase if Joe was that impaired? Then the biggie, Elon may be leaving the administration and the Doge Group, who of course was the plan the whole time. So while all that distraction is going on, what are we missing? What are we not paying attention to? Refunding the government. On a prior program, We covered unusual media coverage about some of the largest contractors in government. Namely, they're being put on notice the government is going to be canceling some of the very large contracts with firms like Accenture and Booz Allen, among others. Thanks to a researcher in the investment world named Usman Sheikh, we have quite a bit of detail on how that's working out. Recall I said at the time it was very unusual for anything about large government contractors to have that kind of media detail. Those are some scary folks, my friends, and they are incredibly frightening when they get mad. At the same time, Doge has indicated they want to save $1 trillion in government spending. Here are some of the data points from Usman's content, and I'm quoting. Deloitte lost 129 federal contracts worth $372 million. And a lot of data is publicly available, by the way, off the Doge website. The scale involved is massive. 65 billion in total contracts are under review. 7,100 contracts are being scrutinized currently by Doge. 130 billion is claimed savings identified to date. The goal of reaching $1 trillion in total savings. Contracts terminated by individual company. Deloitte lost 129 contracts. Booz Allen lost 60. Guidehouse lost 54 contracts. Accenture lost 30 contracts. General Dynamics lost 16. The biggest terminations were 158 million with the National Institutes of Health, or NIH, contract they had with Deloitte, 137 million with Health and Human Services, HHS, for a software contract with Accenture, 126 million with ORR, which was with General Dynamics, another National Institutes of Health contract for 68 million with Deloitte. Deloitte appears to be taking the brunt of the cuts so far, although the impact is deeper at others like Leidos. Looking deeper, 3 patterns are present according to Usman. The first pattern is strategic service targeting. Diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are being terminated everywhere. Organizational transformation reduced or cut entirely. Strategic planning services labeled non-essential. Enterprise risk management projects are being canceled. Programs with soft deliverables or vague metrics. Pattern number 2, agency concentration. Health and Human Services, the CDC, and the National Institutes of Health are at the core of the cuts. That would be Robert Kennedy's work. Also, the same people that were involved in the coup. A Vellis comment, that this would make sense because RFK is involved. 300 million in digital transformation initiatives have been terminated. Another comment from me on that one is, I worked on digital transformation initiatives in government. Telling me the government is trying to reinvent itself is something that's been going on in this country since 1776. Multiple public health programs are discontinued, major reductions in research technology services, and then the third pattern, which is implementation versus strategy. Technical projects focused on cloud do seem to be surviving. Major modernization efforts are being modified but not ended. Advisory services are being slashed. Usman's comment is what happens next. The GSA deadline on March 31st required firms to identify 25 to 30% in additional potential savings. And these were the exact words GSA told those vendors. They want it written at a level that a 15-year-old can understand what they're saying. They want services explained in layman's terms. My input on this is that what they're doing is on par with what I saw in the private sector whenever the economy goes through a recession. From steel companies to automakers to consumer product companies, during a recession, they order vendors flat out, you need to find a way to save us 20% or you're fired, or we're going to hire somebody else. I saw it in the early 90s. I saw it in the late 90s. I saw it in 2008 for sure. Saw it again in 2001. The private sector does this all the time. It's just the first time somebody's done this in government. Plus, the other thing too, folks, that's important to keep in mind is we have to remember the way the government funds things and budgets things. If you don't spend your budget, what do you call it? Then the next year's budget gets cut. So they're always looking for ways to spend their budget, even if it makes no sense. So what this is also going to do is many of these agencies are going to have no choice but to do what very rarely has ever happened in government. They're going to of a fashion, they're going to have to give money back to Treasury because they didn't spend it. It's not so much they're literally giving it back, but it's just we didn't spend our budget this year. And yes, with biblical certainty, then the following year they're going to get less money, and they're going to have to figure out how to get by with less money. So it's the age-old thing of when you have too many years of good activity, people get lazy. Recessions force everybody to raise their game and do better. Usman's final input was these figures are not entirely everything that's been cut, especially the scale of the impact of people who've been laid off. And equally, not to sound like my colleagues in the Fortune 50 from the 1990s, but in my book, the real question is how many feds who were laid off can find other work or are unable to change to find other federal work or work in the private sector. I know factually from several sources, including folks I know personally, people who took the federal job buyouts. Many of them were 5 to 10 years away from retirement. And many of them have told me that they retired from government and they're just going to give it a go with the retirement monies they have, or they're going to take some 1099 work on the side to make ends meet until they hit 65. We will see. Things in Kentucky. Here's a mind scrambler for you. It's one of those classic things I love to think about when it comes to major historical or current affairs items. You have two strongly pushed views on the topic concerning Fort Knox, where the truth may in fact be in the middle. As a comparative case in point, narcotics trafficking. The left believes we need to remove the desire to take drugs with social programs, and the right believes we need tougher law enforcement. When the truth is we need elements of the U.S. government to stop pushing narcotics. The two ideological views therefore become essentially irrelevant. So when it comes to Fort Knox, we have this. We have one view who says we need to audit Fort Knox to prove there's gold in there. Another view says there's no need for an audit and to trust what the Treasury tells the public about the gold. So let me melt some of your brains, and I'm dead serious about this. Depending on the depth of the audit and the degree to which they inspect the gold bars. Remember the backstory about World War II and all the countries who placed large quantities of their national treasury gold in the U.S. for safekeeping. Remember, there were some countries, including France, who were a bit put off when the United States told them at the end of World War II, we'll give you dollars, but we're keeping your gold. What if one of the main reasons why there's been no audit is it would reveal we have so many other countries' gold in there? We didn't necessarily melt it down and put American eagles on it. I would assume it still has the markings of those countries, unless, of course, in fact, we did melt it down. It's a heck of a view. The Apollo program successfully landed humans on the moon 6 times between 1969 and 1972. While the official narrative framed these missions as demonstrations of American technological superiority during the Cold War, or as steps towards Mars exploration, given Wernher von Braun's work with Walt Disney in a number of movies they put together that literally laid out how landing on the moon would lead to eventual Mars exploration. Alternative theories propose some intriguing possibilities. After demonstrating lunar landing capability 2 or 3 times, why continue with 6 missions in total? Some unconventional theories suggest 2 alternative motivations. The first was artifact recovery. According to some theorists, NASA or the government in general may have discovered evidence of artifacts on the lunar surface, necessitating multiple missions to study and potentially retrieve those objects, that is, regardless of who put them there. The second is catastrophe evidence collection. Proponents of alternative catastrophe theories suggest the missions collected samples of lunar glass created by ancient solar eruptions, physical evidence potentially connected to flood myths and disaster legends across human history. Most satellites follow an equatorial orbit for practical reasons. They benefit from the Earth's rotational momentum during launch, which requires less fuel. Polar orbits, while more challenging and fuel-intensive, are typically reserved for surveillance satellites or spy satellites that need to observe the entire planet's surface. SpaceX's Fram-2 mission currently has 4 civilian astronauts in orbit. Though officially described as space tourism with a focus on polar observation, there's reason for skepticism. If observations were the primary goal, unmanned probes would be more cost-effective and less risky than sending human crews. Human crews are typically deployed when missions require adaptability on-site decision-making, or handling equipment that automated systems cannot manage effectively, as exemplified by the presence of the Israeli astronaut Ilan Raman on the ill-fated Columbia mission in 2003. He was reportedly on board to operate specialized surveillance equipment as part of the future invasion of Iraq. The current mission includes a diverse crew, a cryptocurrency billionaire, an adventurer, a film director, and a robotics expert. While marketed as tourism, their specialized backgrounds raise questions about what is the true purpose of that mission. Given recent scientific concerns about changes in Earth's magnetic poles and the weakening of our magnetic shield, it seems plausible that the mission's true purpose involves monitoring these phenomena with human precision and adaptability than automated systems can provide. Documentaries to watch. My last program on March 7th, I provided several documentaries on both Netflix and Amazon that were worth watching, depending on the topic. I have another one to add on Netflix, being the new documentary about Charles Manson. The name of the program is Chaos, The Manson Murders. It's based on the book by the same name by the author Tom O'Neill. It's important to note the Netflix documentary is not as detailed as the book, and probably by design. I never cease to be amazed by what you can say in a book and no one gets upset, but if you place it in electronic media, everybody loses their mind. Reminds me of the famous Alan Dulles comment in the Warren Commission about Americans don't read. Can you imagine if the book about Dr. Fauci was made into a documentary? My God, the earth would melt. If you already know of the MK Ultra elements about Manson, this fills in some pieces other documentaries only covered in cursory fashion. Again, there's more in the book. The documentary on Netflix covers the whole Beach Boys thing, the famous Laurel Canyon music producer who had ties to U.S. intelligence, why Roman Polanski and his wife Sharon Tate were in that house in the first place. It also delves into the Laurel Canyon LSD distribution history. The latter item's importance is another confirming source of information. That area was ground zero of some crazy history in the United States. A small sidebar: what age did Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and Jim Morrison all die? 27. Those three artists were heavily connected to Laurel Canyon and the scene up there during the 1960s. There are many other artists who died at 27, both in the rock genre as well as others. Notably, one of the founding members of the Grateful Dead, Ron McKernan, is part of that group. Importantly, recall my program where I leveraged the research of Amazing Polly into the potential the entire history of the Grateful Dead was also part of MK Ultra operations. Lastly, Kurt Cobain of Nirvana, along with many others, also died at 27. Many of these deaths tending to fall into the categories of suicide, murder, drug overdoses, and plane crashes. It may not seem too important, but it does to me when it comes to this final item. One of the takeaways from that documentary was a potential distinct goal of MK Ultra regarding Charles Manson. Recall what I said also on other programs about the difference between a program or a project. Programs often have a handful or many projects operating under the goals of the overall program. MK Ultra was a program, and it had many projects under it. The one most tend to think of is the use of LSD as well as shock and trauma to create the means to influence an individual to carry out any desired task. It appears with Manson, the MK Ultra planners had something unique in mind, manipulating a single individual into manipulating multiple other people into carrying out such tasks. If you capture any one of those arms of the Hydra, you have still not shut down the source. The book goes into detail on a few things not said on the program. Case in point, the house on Cielo Drive where Sharon Tate and the others were murdered was always under electronic surveillance. So MK Ultra folks could monitor what went down. That's not an isolated incident. Recall the stories about what happened with Jim Jones when his followers committed suicide in Guyana. It's been established that folks from the intelligence community were on site monitoring everything in Guyana. Why would that be the case, do you suppose? Lastly, the documentary is another confirmation of law enforcement either being interfered with or taking part in leaving such groups operating to let these experiments follow their natural course. Let us always recall what Charles Manson's response was when he was asked by a reporter who he really was. Manson's reply was, "I'm nobody. I'm a tramp, a bum, a hobo. I'm a boxcar and a jug of wine." The words he said have been heard before in reference to other historical events. Like, "I'm just a patsy. I don't know who killed the president." On a lighter note, Velis t-shirts, though we don't have any rogue merchandise, and I know folks have asked over the years if we would do that. The costs are a bit much. However, if you would like a Velis t-shirt, those are available from various retailers. I posted to Discord the link on Saturday, March 15th off Amazon.com. Zazzle and Etsy also sell items with the Velis logo in white or gold. Now, be aware there's a death metal band by the same name, so be sure not to buy one of those unless death metal music's your thing. Be sure to acquire a good brand of t-shirt as well, as I found some of the shirts sold are a little flimsy. I own several Velis t-shirts myself, so if you should see a guy at an airport wearing one, it might just be me. A book worth consideration is called Extreme Cruelty, The Complicity of Judges in the Shame of Wrongful Convictions by Judge Steve Dankoff. It's a short read and would make a great text in several academic disciplines, whether law, political science, anthropology, or public policy. When I say it's a short read, I'm serious. It's about 130 pages, and it's a small physical book. Many reasons for my recommendation, because this book is not one of those tomish pages of legalese or government think tank recommendations on the legal system. It's a very narrow focus on why many judges have allowed convictions who violate due process, among other considerations. He also rightly points out the larger the study group or task force attempting to reform the courts, the greater the likelihood it's going to fail. I found it a very good book, and if you have any interest in a baseline of why decisions by judges in many, but not all, respects have become what they are, it's worth a read. Ronan Farrow. Anyone know who Ronan Farrow is or remember all the controversy about him? He's the son of actress and former wife of Woody Allen, Mia Farrow. He was the one who tipped the first domino of Harvey Weinstein, who led others with his reporting and digging into that topic. He's a Rhodes Scholar and a former State Department official. It's worth noting that he does not stay in any particular lane on topics, and he's equally upset the left and the right. Of late, aside from writing for the New Yorker magazine, he's been producing documentaries for HBO. In previous books, he laid out the reasons for declining U.S. global influence and detailed extensively how fear and intimidation tactics have been used in Hollywood. One of his HBO documentaries was called Surveilled. It digs into the depth of surveillance in all aspects of public life and the firms and agencies doing it. Recall my comment earlier about people monitoring the public mood during the coup. Another reason for raising him today from the memory hole is the famous opening monologue by comedian Ricky Gervais when he taunted the audience at one of the awards ceremonies by saying, "I know you're all living in fear of Ronan Farrow." We're not always going to agree with Ronan, and we don't need to. He's established his work, and he's consistent in the work he does. I wonder what next item he produces, whether it shakes the universe or whether he winds up strangled somewhere by elites in a hotel closet. A joke from the Soviet Union. Citizens in the Soviet Union often had to wait in long lines for daily goods, as I mentioned earlier. These waits would sometimes take all day to acquire whatever was at the end of the line. As a result, people spent a lot of time while they were in line telling stories, talking about what was going on in the country, or jokes. The government could often tell the mood of the people by whatever were the most popular jokes. One of those jokes was the following. A drunk man was outside the Kremlin yelling death to the dictator. A KGB agent arrested him and took him before Stalin. The KGB agent told Stalin this man was saying horrible things outside the Kremlin. We're taking him to prison. Stalin looked up from his desk and asks the man, what was he saying? He then asks the man, well, who is the dictator? And the man replies, well, Hitler, of course. Stalin looks at the KGB agent and asks, who did you think he meant? He then released the man and had the agent sent to prison. Investigations I'd like to see. To mention an oldie but a goodie is the jingle about there's no George Soros or his son. He's entirely an asset and resource of Lord Malik Brown. This is true of many, including Joe Biden and the current resident at 1600 Pennsylvania. This said, let me offer an alternative epistle to the PSYOP, who is the release of the files on Epstein occupying the media of late. At the same time, what I'm about to say is true and would reveal things, and it would cause a reaction. The reaction is why restraint has to be exercised. So without being cryptic, instead of focusing on old Jeff Epstein and Ghislaine, let me ask the following. We have serious financial weirdness going on with the mega group run by Les Wexner of the limited companies and its direct involvement with both Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. We have an Al Capone-like situation where you can't prosecute someone for murder like Capone, but you can prosecute them on financial crimes. We have mega group investments involved with Epstein, then Wexner and his wife's involvement with the Ohio State University, who's raised eyebrows. The Wexner name is on a lot of buildings at that school. It's the strange circumstances where money is given to the university and then the university directs the money to companies owned by the Wexners or their interests, including their family office. At a minimum, there should be enough there to assemble a grand jury. Then the same considerations for the folks in the orbit from Canada who have immense holdings in the U.S. Yes, that would be the Bronfman family and their empire under Seagram's, who is run by a firm called Diageo. Diageo, interestingly, is a British multinational with headquarters in London. Will knock me over with a feather, I'm shocked. Between the two families, we have some potential RICO activity there. Then I would like investigations into the following person and those in his orbit. This would be the famous and infamous former Maui police chief, John Pelletier, who was also the incident commander during the Las Vegas shootings back in 2017. I'm sure Pelletier knows a lot of people, and I have a strange suspicion he and the people he's involved in are up to no good. Some of you may have heard he's now also been named a co-conspirator with P. Diddy. You can't make this stuff up. Mexico. Brendan O'Connell has made the decision to leave Mexico and reflects a concerning reality that aligns with my experiences throughout South America, that being widespread anti-American sentiment that permeates Mexican society. This hostility towards the United States persists and intensifies largely because it serves the interests of Mexico's ruling class. Unlike many of its Latin American neighbors, Mexico's power structure features a distinctive characteristic, that being their elites strongly identify with their Spanish heritage. This self-identification creates a profound social divide. The upper echelons of Mexican society often view themselves as culturally and ethnically superior to the average Mexican citizen. The average citizen, who they regard as being of mixed heritage, whether indigenous, African, or mestizo, rather than pure Spanish blood. This ethnic and class stratification serves a strategic purpose. By continuously stoking sentiment against the United States, Mexico's power brokers effectively redirect domestic frustration away from themselves and toward an external target. Recall what I said about monitoring the public's mood. The current Mexican administration, despite its populist rhetoric, operates within this same framework, a pattern seen across multiple Mexican governments regardless of their stated political ideology. The cultivation of anti-American sentiment functions as a sophisticated form of scapegoating. Economic inequality, corruption, inadequate infrastructure, and the failures of institutions in Mexico, problems largely created and perpetuated by its own ruling class, are conveniently attributed to the United States or historical grievances. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. People have genuine anger against the United States, both historical and contemporary, that are amplified and exploited by those who benefit from it. This results in animosity that serves as a distraction from addressing the real power structures in the country and limits opportunities for the average citizen in Mexico. Understanding the complexity of all of this matters in understanding our relationship with our friends south of the border as Brendan picks up his bags and moves on. Future prediction, military spending. A future prediction by your friend Vellis. Historically, Russian military tactics have centered on defensive tactics and using attrition. They don't have the advantages of geography when it comes to mountains or other obstructions on their borders. They do, however, have a lot of real estate. This is why Russia has always been a big fan of long-range artillery. Fall back when necessary, pound the heck out of the enemy, and when they fall back, retake the territory. Therefore, Russian military doctrine and weapons production is a lot of good weapons rather than a handful of really great ones. You have to recall the old joke about Russia's approach to space exploration. The United States builds $1 million pen who works in space. Russia sends their astronauts into space with a pencil. America builds $1 million toilet who works in orbit. Russia sends you into space with bags and tongs. My other favorite, Russian fighter jets for years have had vents on the top of the air intakes. Why? Well, because the Russians always planned on having bad or damaged runways, or for that matter, just a lot of snow. So their planes traditionally had larger, more forgiving tires, and the intake openings are closed during takeoff. That way you don't suck up debris into your engines until the plane's in flight. Once the aircraft's in the air, then they close the top vents and open the front ones. Again, they're always very practical about these things. In current time, Russia now has a bunch of NATO and US equipment to analyze. And don't be silly either. A couple of countries have no doubt paid the Russians for the ability to sneak in and examine it. I would suspect such characters as North Korea, China, Turkey, South Korea, and maybe Argentina. Why does this matter? It's not just the gear, which traditionally means analyzing the armor, the metallurgy, the construction techniques, the engines and communications gears. It also includes all the downed missiles and drone systems the Russians are now analyzing. At the same time, don't forget Russia now has a literal bonanza of Western software from all that captured equipment. For most countries, that could mean years of analysis, but not Russia. You have to deal with reality, and that is the fact that the Russians have the best free agent hackers in the world, many of whom speak English. The result is getting to the heart of how all that works isn't going to take them that long. It also means Russia can now begin making incremental tweaks in various weapons and support systems, as well as improving future planned weapons. So where am I going with this? Well, it often takes Western countries a long time to develop a new weapon system or even improve the ones they have. So they often, in these situations, do the only thing they can do. They throw a lot of money at it. Of course, they wouldn't have this self-created problem if they hadn't provided Ukraine so much of their gear. I can hear the marketing spiel now about how America must respond to all these new and improved weapon systems. Of course they're new and improved. They improved them with your captured technology. That's not just conjecture, as one of NATO's senior military leaders recently bemoaned the need for weapons research because of how good the Russian equipment has become. Someone wrote in the comments section of that article, "Didn't you tell us 6 months ago the Russians were losing and fighting with shovels and parts from old dishwashers? Why does this sound like Iraq in 2003? The JFK files. Before I delve into this, I have some books for you at the end of this segment, a number of whom I've recommended before. They're a little off the beaten track, but I find them to be a far more valuable read than some of the more popular ones. Let's begin with some high points on the JFK file release the last few weeks. The first item is, it's my usual cornucopia of events the last 150 years. Whether it's Jack the Ripper in 1888 through world wars, and especially the still classified details of World War I, to JFK, to Ronald Reagan's assassination attempt, to Oklahoma City, to Jeff Epstein, and all the rest of it, it's all part of the same system. The same fabric of human history over those years is a hidden, dangerous, and very private conflict among people who don't tolerate intruders. Trying to understand any of these events individually without the broader context is often going to lead to confusion. The second item, we covered on prior programs the machinery who's continued to keep secret the real truths of the why of the assassination. We have to remember that that machinery is a living, breathing thing. It's not just a handful of individuals at Langley or the FBI noticing someone is poking around at facts who need to remain hidden, and they need to stop by that person's house and warn them. It's a machinery who is creating confusion and misdirection actively on all of these events for very serious reasons for decades. Third, the released files are not as advertised. What was released are only the files released in 1992 to that review board, and it's not all the files. The files released to the Assassination Review Board in 1992, we have to remember, were already scrubbed. Many of these files had been released previously and were redacted. They're less redacted in this release. Equally, on X, aka Twitter, that platform's been very valuable in relation to several topics over the years. Yet all of those JFK file postings on X, they were existing documents who researchers already had access to previously. Logically, if we had a lone gunman, all this nonsense about the release of the files would not be an issue, and it would have occurred decades ago. At the same time, if these are indeed all the relevant assassination files, then what was all the fuss about where every U.S. president since LBJ is debriefed as soon as they take office? And that's not conjecture, folks. That's a fact. Recall as well in the 1980s or 1990s that audio turned up from a police motorcycle in Dallas that day whose mic button was stuck in the on position, meaning the audio picked up by the bike is in the official record, and the government has already accepted, based on that audio, there were multiple shooters. To paraphrase an old saying, any of us with an interest in this topic have been looking at it for so long we've forgotten what we already knew. Consider for a moment the logic of what we're experiencing and expecting. We're expecting our own government, who we already know lies through their teeth, like most other governments, to admit one of two realities publicly. They're either incompetent and can't figure out who did it, or they were in fact involved in the killing. So why in the name of God would they ever do that? Regardless of who's in the White House, there was the famous Esquire article early in Bill Clinton's administration in 1993 where they claimed he wanted all the JFK files and was told no. Really? Bill Clinton has been a known CIA asset since he was a Rhodes Scholar. His handler was Oliver North, for God's sakes. Yet Bill Clinton is going to challenge the agency in 1993 about JFK? I don't think so. Ryan Dawson is one of several folks who has some very solid views on the JFK topic. He feels the involvement of Israel is the smoking gun. My personal view is that may not be going far enough. It certainly is a topic, though, worth investigating more deeply, but it is not the sole reason as to why. Fourth, there are nuggets of value in this release, or re-release, if you will, not the least of which is the U.S. aid angle. The fact that that organization was funding overthrows and everything else in Southeast Asia even back then. We have at least 60,000 documents have been released, and many are several pages long. It'll take time to review all that content, even if researchers are using AI to accomplish their research. Also, there was no index released or summary of the content, who's by design, of course, meaning people will have to make the effort to review it. This is where the famous line from the Warren Commission staff member comes up, where he said to the committee that even their documentation would reveal enough of the truth to the public. And as I said earlier in today's program, Alan Dulles, the former CIA director, famously said, "It doesn't matter because the American people don't read." The fifth item. The release of these documents may enable existing researchers to fill in missing details in their own research. One of those is the researcher John Newman and his Into the Storm series. Because he explains the CIA naming conventions for people in operations, he provides what many of those shorthand codes are. He also clarifies people connected to the topic who are also known by 5 or more names, and the list goes on. He's the guy who provides you with the facts to help you draw your own conclusions. This may not sound like much, but it means authors like him can now connect certain parties who were only rumor before, or clarify various agency directives, and the list goes on. Sixth, it's been said by several parties already, these files demonstrate an immense machine and network operated globally by U.S. and other intelligence agencies. Rather than just sitting in their offices, intelligence folks have literally involved themselves in every aspect of the United States and international affairs. Industry, higher education, research institutions, international banking, and yes, narcotics trafficking. Said more bluntly, call it what you will, the deep state is alive and well and has been operating since 1947. The seventh item, these files, if interpreted properly, demonstrate the degree to which U.S. intelligence community was in league with the London Corporation. Eighth, this item popped up in the Daily Mail during the file releases, and it is notable. It's been documented previously, but the Daily Mail article from, I believe it was last week or this week, ties several things together. John F. Kennedy, even if he'd won a second term as president, probably never would have lived to see the end of it. And I don't mean because he would have been killed. It's because of his health. The Kennedy family fought for years any suggestion John was sick, specifically with Addison's disease, until the 1980s when they acknowledged, yes, he did have Addison's. It's a condition where your adrenal glands do not produce enough cortisol. These days, we can treat it rather effectively with hormone replacement, but in the 1960s, treatments were not as effective. One of the things who can intensify Addison's is bodily injuries. Well, of course, JFK's patrol boat was knocked out by a Japanese destroyer during World War II, and he and the crew were very badly injured. Now, by all means, he gets all credit for his excellent swimming skills, because he was able to save several of the crew members, and get them to shore and get them to safety. But literally getting his command knocked out from under him didn't do his existing health problems any good, and he had health problems going all the way back to when he was young. Then there's another item that has also been proven, like a lot of celebrities at that time, including Marilyn Monroe, JFK was taking doses of methamphetamines. Lastly, in that Daily Mail article, the real reason Jackie Kennedy had those miscarriages. JFK was constantly afflicted with STDs from all the women he was sleeping with, and he kept giving Jackie STDs. As my final item, let me offer you several lesser-known books who are excellent on this topic and probably do more for you on this subject than the files that were released. The first book is The Inheritance, Poisoned Fruit of JFK's Assassination, written by Christopher Fulton, Fulton. It was ironically published on November 22nd of 2018. The book covers several key elements about JFK and predominantly centers on this, that Kennedy's private secretary, who ironically was named Lincoln, and by the way, Lincoln's private secretary was named Kennedy. Mrs. Lincoln defied the orders of the Assassination Review Board when it came to personal effects and other items of the Kennedys that they may have had in their possession the day of the assassination. She eventually provided personal items of John to this Canadian author who wanted to create a museum centered around those effects. One of them was that Kennedy was wearing a leather-strapped watch on the day of the assassination. It's my view the U.S. government went medieval on this guy because a number of those personal effects, including the watch, could show mercury was used in the bullets who killed JFK. The author also claims he had a meeting with a still mostly lucid retired Ronald Reagan who told him perhaps it was time the public knew the truth. Walking the Razor's Edge, The Baron and the Dutchman, by Tommy and Hilda Wilkins. Hilda, Hilde, Wilkins, Wilkens. Being a Dutch couple, that's probably pronounced Wilkins. This book was originally published in Dutch, and few U.S. researchers even knew about it until it was translated into English. The book's focus is heavily on a key figure named Baron de Mohrenschildt, and I've mentioned him before. He was a leader in the White Russian community in Dallas. He knew Oswald for quite some time, took care of Marina after Oswald's death, and supposedly killed himself right before he was to testify in the 1970s to the second Kennedy assassination hearings. My guidance to you is, among many things, this book helps articulate how U.S. intelligence has leveraged certain ethnic groups in the United States for certain operations to give themselves skilled individuals out of those communities. The next book is the Skorzeny Papers, Skorzeny, written by Major Ralph Ganis, Ganis. An excellent book based on the personal diaries of Otto Skorzeny, the head of German Special Forces during World War II. It lays out the history and the use of shell or false companies, money laundering, arms movements, and details on things like the real origination of Operation Gladio. There's a ton of important details about intel agencies, Cold War goals, and the only source of certain details on the Kennedy assassination. Skorzeny was quoted as saying shortly before his death he knew that of the people he had trained over the years, that some of the folks he had trained had been involved in the assassination. The next book is A Warning from History by Corey Hughes, another book who's the sole source of several details about the assassination, and importantly, the author names three of the shooters, David Ferry, who you'll remember from the JFK movie, Carrie Thornley, and Lauren Hall, with possible other shooters such as Sergio Acacia and none other than Jack Valente of the Motion Picture Association. I've covered on other programs that reporters tried over the years to get Jack Valente to comment about what he was doing or where he was during the Kennedy assassination. He and George Bush Sr. Both had amnesia and just couldn't recall where the hell they were. Warning from History also includes lesser known but still verified elements about the assassination, including as source material depositions by Jim Garrison, who profiled heavily in the JFK movie, of witnesses and Garrison's own papers. This is one of those things where people will say about the JFK assassination, Jim Garrison did X, or Jim Garrison commented on whatever. Corey Hughes's book actually says, here's what that paper is, here's who that witness was, here is a witness that Garrison deposed, but the Warren Commission refused to talk to, and here's what that witness said. The book also covers the creation of a number of false positives of people thinking they encountered Oswald when in fact it was a body double and a false plant. This book also does cover the role of a number of people that were connected to Israel. Then Report from Iron Mountain by Leonard Lewin, a book, we've talked about this on Rogue as well, a book where the author repeatedly tells you the story you're reading isn't true. If you want something that lays out to you why the military-industrial complex exists and what an alternative form of global economic model would look like, this is your book. I personally have always believed this book was produced and done so in a joking manner in order to get the truth out. My old comment about sometimes you have to tell the truth through fiction because people can't handle it if you tell them straight up. Then there's books I call desk references. These are books that you want to have on the shelf when you're reading somebody else's Kennedy book. This includes John Newman's books. He's written 4 volumes. One is called Where Angels Tread Lightly. Second book is Countdown to Darkness. The third book is Into the Storm. And then his fourth book, I've covered on a prior show, and that one was the one called Uncovering Popov's Mole. And this is about James Angleton at the CIA, who was desperately trying to find where the Soviet spy was inside the CIA. A man who Newman believes is, in fact, a man named Bruce Solly, Sollie. Solly, ironically, was the guy tapped by Angleton to find the mole. How best to hide a spy. Why does the book relate to JFK? Well, it helps you understand all the intelligence, counterintelligence, and global chess playing among the agencies at that time. As the old saying goes, an environment where the first casualty is the truth. It's also a book that, beyond revealing who the hell the spy was, it does cover the use of false agents sent into the Soviet Union, of which Oswald conclusively has been proven he was one of those people. Depending on your source material, it's anywhere from 8 to 12 people that we tried to push into the Soviet Union as fake defectors. But the other thing about the book that's helpful from a JK standpoint is it helps you understand the kind of environment Kennedy was trying to operate in when dealing with the intelligence agencies. The last one is Hidden in Plain Sight by the author Tim Smith. This book is another desk reference. He covers the testimony of 52 witnesses that appeared before the Select Committee on Assassinations, and then he compares their statements before and after their testimony, namely because many of the people who testified to the Warren Commission, their testimony was altered. And so many of those folks gave other testimony later, and he compares the two to show you what was left out of the Warren Commission and why that probably was. The other thing about this book that's important is the book covers 5 wounds in Kennedy's body, leading to the belief there were 5 shooters. Why does that matter? Well, it's very critical in international circles because a firing squad is usually comprised of five marksmen. It's been said by a number of people that if there were 5 shooters, then that would be a very specific message to the international community that the U.S. government killed their own commander-in-chief for betraying some deeply held assumption or goal of the elites in government, equally to demonstrate to the international environment how far the U.S. government would be willing to go to hold the course. His book also notes how 2 key public events led to pressure on Congress to reopen the JFK assassination reviews. The first being the Geraldo Rivera airing in 1975 of the Zapruder film publicly, and the second was the famous Oliver Stone JFK film. I've also shared with you on a prior program my personal belief that Stone has included disinformation in the JFK film by design, because, as I often say, nobody can tell all the truth at once, so he had to mix in truth with distraction. There are other good books on this topic, including the one that Stone relied on for the film called Crossfire, which was written by the famous Jim Marrs. The books I've offered you today are some of the lesser known ones, and I believe some of the more critical ones that have been published. So with that, Algo, I yield the floor, sir.
Yeah, I have an issue with that mute button. Kennedy's always been, it's been one of those topics that's so complex and so far back, and the fact that it's still being hotly debated, and it just goes to show you that whatever happened behind that is still happening. Like, whatever the powers were that made that happen still matter today. And that's, like, without really digging too deep into the events, that's kind of the main takeaway for me. Let's see here. So I did have a couple items. I had some fun when you talked about Ghostbusters. Well, I don't know if you talked about it, but you were talking about academia. And yes. Academia with, as far as like not getting any money. Well, the line in Ghostbusters, in the beginning of the movie, they get kicked out because these guys are university.
You've never worked in the private sector. They expect results. I literally had that conversation yesterday with a close friend of mine.
What a great line. He's like, oh, I like the university. They give us facilities and equipment, and they don't expect us to produce anything.
Right.
You don't know what it's like out there. You've never left college. I've worked in the private sector. They expect results. And like the look he gets on his face, like, it's just classic. I love it. I've been using the heroin addict metaphor for some time. I've got some friends who are complaining about markets right now. And it's like, well, you pretty much fell asleep at the wheel and you just gave your money to people who take fees from you to put your money into the SP 500 or whatever. Like you're not taking charge of your finances. And as a trader, I find that unconscionable. Like at least have a portion of your wealth where you are doing something with it. Now I know not everybody is equipped to, trade, and I can definitely talk to you about that. But in the end, I think it's a little bit irresponsible just to let your money go to the 401k every single month without even considering maybe just flipping it over to a money market if you think something bad's going to happen. Putin invades Ukraine, or the special military operation begins, however you want to say it, depending on what side you're on, if you will. There was an 18% drop in the market when that happened. And it happened after, like, the actual beginning of that operation was maybe 10, 15% into that market drop. One of my buddies took his money out of the market like 2-3 weeks ago when he understood what was going on with the tariffs. He saw what was happening in the market. He pretty much sold the top. He talked to me about it first, and I said, well, yeah, I mean, what I see on the charts matches up, and everyone else is hating on him. But hey, here's the deal about it. If you're responsible, you can laugh to the bank. Everybody else can complain. So anyway, just the main thing is don't fall asleep at the wheel with the market there.
Well, and I'll be the first to admit that one of the firms I worked for had a very good retirement plan for your 401k investments, in the sense of what your investing options were. And I was so busy with the intensity of the job that I took my eye off the ball for a year and realized I should have moved some of my percentages of my contributions into new investments they made available to us. And that's on me. I did lose out on some money I could have made. But the other thing too is, it's said by many every time this happens, you don't panic when everybody's panicking. This is in progress now. This is underway. This is not the moment you want to start moving stuff around. You need to stay the course a bit. I mean, how many times, folks, just when it comes to stories we've seen in the news about whatever the topic may be, and within 48 hours, we've got all this new information that's like, oh, wait, no, that was way off. That's not even close to what the hell was going on. So right now, and Donald's done this before with tariffs. He did this last time. Now, not to this degree, but this is a classic New York real estate negotiating move. He comes in all guns blazing hard to get the other side's attention. It's like what happened, for those of you who remember my comments about Colombia, where we hit Colombia with tariffs right when their harvest of flowers, because they're south of the equator. So that was the end of summer for them. And we hit them right as perishable items are on ships headed for various markets in the United States. And we hit them with tariffs. Well, that lasted 48 hours before they're like, okay, we'll take back people that cross the border, and we'll negotiate. Now it's bullying, straight up bullying by the United States. But this goes to what V and Algo and I and others out there in the alternative space have been saying for some time, that they're resetting everything. And that's where Tom Luongo comes in, especially when it comes to the SOFR rates versus the old LIBOR, other intricacies of financial trades and so on. And another, I hate to use the word advice, another bit of thought commentary from me also, folks, is this. It's not just in the case of Tom Luongo. I've seen people absolutely lose their minds with Tom because he said 10 things and one thing was off.
Yeah.
And it's this attitude of, well, you're a loser and I'm never listening to you again. It's like, oh my God, you need some medication. Slow down, calm down, take it easy. This is why you listen to multiple sources of information, because there is a point at which, to quote V, you're reading other people's email. You don't have the source data. You're not in the room where the decisions are being made. And if you were in the room where the decisions are being made, you'd probably be very busy right now moving money around. But my point is, Tom has a very good overall worldview of what is happening and why. Now, the big one which people expect is, well, what should I do? I mean, that's true of anything. I mean, when I was a consultant explaining to companies where their operational or organizational problems were, it's like, yeah, that really does help clarify some things we were confused about, a couple of those elements. Now, what do we do? And it's like, that's where I got to close the door and look at everybody in the room and say, did you all take your Tylenol or Excedrin about an hour ago? Because at this point, anything I tell you is going to be painful. You're going to have to change culture. You're going to have to remove certain executives that you went to college with. I mean, that's the kind of stuff's going to have to happen. And I tend to find, no harm, no foul, and I get it. I mean, I totally get it. Whenever it comes to money, people do not think rationally.
Nope. Greed and fear.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I've got family members that are financial planners, and I'll be the first to acknowledge that talking to someone in their 30s back in 2008, where the market, just absolutely imploded, that's one thing. Because it's like, well, we're going to recover for this. It may take 8 to 10 years and, blah, 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 blah. Talking to somebody in their 60s about similar events to 2008, well, not to be indelicate, do you have 10 years? You don't have 10 years to wait, I'll tell you that. So it's like, if you've made a mistake, and especially given the dynamics between individuals or family members or married couples, when somebody, through no fault of their own or just force majeure or an act of God that the markets have done whatever, is blaming themselves or being blamed by others. I trusted you in our relationship to manage our money. I trusted you to manage, mom and dad, the money you're going to leave us, yada, yada, yada. Damn it, what have you done? This to me is why anybody who provides guidance or counsel on the financial world, if you're off by a centimeter, people will absolutely flame the entire game board, because it's like, well, you made one mistake. It's like, look, only God, or perhaps Jesus, or some other religious figure that is in your orbit is infallible. We're all human beings. The question is, and it's Vegas betting, man. I mean, are you up overall? Well, but I lost on that last hand on the blackjack table, right? But are you up overall? That's what we're shooting for. You're not going to win every time. And Tom has said repeatedly, if you're going to freak because I told you something and it didn't turn out quite the way I thought it was, keep your money. Don't listen to my show. And I appreciate the fact he says it.
Look, so Tom puts his money where his mouth is. Everybody's a genius after the fact, right? So, that's the thing. Everybody's, oh, well, I should have done this. I could have done that. And if you shoulda, coulda, woulda, then pretty soon you've should all over yourself. But the reality is that if you're right 5 times out of 10, but you're more right than you are wrong each time, right? So let's say it this way. And this is my business directly. So I could be right half the time. But if I put $1,000 on a trade and I lose 1,000 if I lose, but I win 2,000 when I win, I only got to be right half the time and I'm profitable, and I'm very profitable. So, a guy like me who literally, I don't operate on being right every time. I operate on probabilities. Now, Tom Luongo's out there digging in the data, looking through the ether. He's able to be right a lot of the time. And another thing about Tom is he's very self-reflective. So he just was talking last week about how, for a long time, he's like, oh, it was it's the little hats. And before that, it was someone else. And, now he's saying in his current iteration, like all roads lead to London Corp, and he's like, I even have to ask myself whether or not that's a knee jerk for me, so he's always at least like self-reflecting, but he's been pretty correct about a lot of stuff. And if you're expecting perfection, then good luck to you. Like guys like him, I can relate to, because you're not going to be right every time. And anybody that has anything to say about it, it's just noise. He doesn't care. I mean, it gets to you a little bit, but dude, these are non-contributors. The hate comes from below. So that's just, and I'm sure he knows that better than I do. The economic war of attrition I like this idea. But what it makes me think of is, going to a new topic here, shifting gears. With Europe, they neutered their economy, right? As Matt Ehret would say, sacrificed it at the altar of Gaia.
Right.
This green energy, and they pretty much. I think they're. I don't know. I don't want to dig too deep into why, right? But the result now is that they no longer have the U.S. really backing them like they used to. Now they're kind of on an island, and they don't have the capability or the equipment to defend themselves or to go on the offensive. So now they're in a very dangerous place, right? So an animal in the corner that's kind of missing a leg and bleeding out might just lash out at you, even though you're going to win anyway. So, and they might even get you in the jugular. So I'd say we would probably be smart to be cautious. But if I can say that, then, all Trump's people and all Putin's people and everybody else has thought that 10 years ago when they planned this whole thing. So I'm not saying anything that the right people don't know. At least I don't think I am. But this business, if you can keep the shooting wars small and let the economic war continue, something's going to happen that's probably not bad, right? And this business that we're seeing right now, it's, I think, Tom said it, and then I'll try to reiterate it best. Tom Luongo, that is. When your house is insolvent, you have to fix a few things. First thing is your cash flow. You have to cut the bleeding, right? You have to limit your expenditures or be smarter about them. Doge. And you have to be smarter about what you're buying, meaning, investments, right? Tariffs maybe can fit into that category, right? This all cash flow. You have to fix your balance sheet. And there's one thing that people don't understand is that whatever gold we do have, I know V is of the opinion we don't have it. I think a lot of it's been moved here to the US. We might have more or less than we thought, but we definitely have a lot in the ground. So just no one's like mining it. When we sold the gold, either to or from the Fed back in like whenever it was, I think it was done so at like $35 or $40 an ounce. Now we're we're hundreds of multiples above that now almost. So if we mark up the balance sheet, that's like, I think it's over $1 trillion, well over $1 trillion or $2 or $3 in gold. So the reality is the picture's not as dire as we might think it is. And the market now it's only about as far down as, not even quite as far as when the special military operation happened in Ukraine, or invasion, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
So people who are panicking are those who will lose. Now, and I don't want to do like the shameless plug here. V told us this stuff was going to happen in Algo Factory like months ago. We knew this stuff was coming in like quarter four. And he even hinted on these shows. Anybody who's watching all the shows with, Vellis, because that tends to be most of the shows these days, he has hinted at this stuff. It's not just Algo Factory, but look, V does massive, massive deals. And I'm not at liberty to say how massive, but the people he deals with are very well informed. And the kind of data that we get over there, and quite frankly on these shows, if you didn't see this coming, then if you had one more eye, then you're a cyclops. I'm sorry. The rogue audience should know all of this. And I tried to warn a very couple of close cohorts, and one of them heeded the warning, and, he's doing okay, like we talked about earlier. So very interesting stuff on the markets. The next bit, this was interesting. Government basically forcing vendors to compete, right?
Yeah.
There's one thing so my understanding about the government of the sweetheart deals, sole source contracting. So the governor's brother has the concrete company that does the job downtown.
Right.
These are sole source contracting for like non-competitive bids. And so I think that limiting the resources of, government agencies is going to force competitive bids if they want to actually get the money spent at all. And like you said, if they don't spend the money, the budget contracts to that degree, right? So
well, there's also, if I could interject real quick, that's also the pattern, folks, that when I was working in Washington and even back home working for defense or government contractors, there's always this thing that the government agencies sign a bunch of contracts at the beginning of the new year. They go through the summer, and then right around June or July, there's a massive last surge. Why? Because, say it with me, they're looking at their budgets and they realize, oh crap, we haven't spent all our money yet. And there's a couple of companies, I worked for one of them, where that's all they do is they're just a bunch of retired folks with a lot of brain power, and they wait until those agencies have that chunk of money left at the end of the year, and they go grab that, and they conduct studies and analysis and similar. Now, a number of the firms do good work. We did, firm I worked for. But the problem is, and I've seen this so many times, no matter how good the work is that they do, 9 times out of 10, the agency in question is still not going to implement what we told them to do because of a variety of reasons. And so this process is probably going to carve out that chunk of money too. Because the big players also knew that. And they would try and come in at the end of the year and say, well, that thing we're doing for you, we could do a study to see, while we're taking care of your IT stuff, we could do a study to see if you've got other risks or what have you. And it's like they know they've got money left in the bank, and they know they've got to get rid of it, because if they don't, it won't be there next year. So Lockheed or Northrop or whomever gets to spend that money. So the pattern I'm seeing, and I also spoke to a number of smaller defense contractors, either were folks I used to work with or are currently working, or I know the folks who run them. They've all told me the same thing. They said, yeah, the big names are getting hammered. And they're easy to hammer because they're so big. But they're like, any of us that are small, the only reason why we're doing business with the government is the only way we can distinguish ourselves is we have to truly prove we provided some value. And so they continue to get money. So case in point, for any of you out there that have worked in government or what have you, and you're looking for another gig, don't look at any of the big defense contractors or government contractors. Go find your local or small ones. Go out on DICE or go out on usajobs.com. Go find the smaller defense contractors. They're the ones that are still getting money. Go ahead.
Lean and mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just, so interesting thing about building businesses. I built a few small ones, nothing to speak of. I mean, when you build it lean and mean from the start, then you're good. The minute you start to get wasteful, it just kind of compounds. So when you're working with the government, who has all of the money in the world that they take from us, then these companies can become incredibly bloated. And, that's probably going to end as long as things dry out. And when you look at the markets go up every single year for 12 years, that's unnatural. The market needs to expand and contract in order to make business efficient. So now we're going to see it happen. This is what needs to happen.
The other thing I'd offer too is, and I alluded to this on some of my prior programs, folks, is we're also witnessing a perfect storm, which is you have a rotating door of people coming out of government service, and they want to work their last 5 to 10 years for a large contractor, usually a large one, because they know they're going to get huge commissions checks. They'll make 3-4 times the amount of money they made even as an SES, senior executive service person, working for a federal agency. And as a result, those bigger contractors to the government, whether defense or just government work, they had to keep getting bigger. They had to keep making more money because the margins are so thin anyway. They have to make ridiculous amounts of money to keep all these high-paid senior leaders paid. And now we've reached the perfect storm of there simply isn't the money. So we're going to have to let you cats go. And that's another major reason why you've got all this real estate selling going on in the Beltway. Go ahead, I'll go.
No, I'm happy to see it. It's just, look, humans are greedy. And when you put a corporation together or an entity, whatever it might be, LLC, LLP, whatever, the scientists have looked at the way that those operate. And if you were to make that corporation into a person, quote unquote, which technically they are legally, then the decisions they make are like sociopathic, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So, and also there have been studies where your politicians at a national level, especially your high level CEOs, very, very huge suspected rate of sociopathy in that group. So you have sociopaths running, that kind of thing, and you're getting those kind of decisions, and they're going to take money and steal, and it's just, you have to force them out. And the only way to do it is to cut off the money. But look, this has been a great show. Veles, I know you got a hard stop. So, thank you for doing this. Any last bits before you jump?
Just my thanks to you as always, my friend, for being my wingman on programs like this when V's got other stuff cooking. My thanks to all of you in the audience, and also especially to any of you well, first of all, of the Islamic faith who just wrapped up Ramadan. Now you can eat and drink again. And for any of you of the Christian faith who are going through Lent, hang in there.
Are you posting? Oh no, that's the Serbian word for it. The fasting.
I try on Fridays, and most certainly on Good Friday is a full 24 or more hour fast. I'm not as what do you call it, loyal, I guess, as my churchgoers who don't eat from what the heck, from Friday morning, or no, I'm terribly like 11:59 on Thursday to 4 in the morning on Saturday when the service ends for Easter.
Yeah, well, as you know, I have Russian relatives out here where I live, and they're at the church, and they're like that. They're very devoted, and I mean, I've done fasts recently, water fast, so it can be done. However, I still give a lot of respect to somebody who can put themselves through that. So, thanks again, Vellis. Thank you for coming on such a great show, and hopefully we get to do it again soon.
Alrighty, take care, everybody.